Studio 404. Testing. Can all you fellas and dolls hear me out there?
It says give me a thumbs up. It says give me a thumbs up. It says Can I make
On this special New Year's Eve broadcast, we've got a show for you that's the bee's knees. We will be remembering some of the biggest events from the decade in sports, pop culture, and of course the news. Here's Brogan to get us started.
Hey dolls and fellas, are you tired of dragging your heavy rugs outside and beating them with tools to only end up getting the dirt off the rug and onto yourself? Well, if you or your friends answer yes to that question, then call Hoover's Vacuum Company. This new product has rotating bristles and is a sleek and shiny new tool that will revolutionize the way you clean. It is more efficient than anything used before, including brooms and mops. I'm telling you, this product is the bee's knees. So look swanky with this new product and impress your friends. And fellas, if you would like to spoil your Sheba, this is the perfect way. So be wise and spend your glue on this nifty new product that everyone will be raving about. And now, a special sports segment from Caroline.
Hey dolls, who can forget the greatest sports personality in 1920, and he is also the first boxer in the United States to make major contributions to sporting. Jack Dempsey was born June 24th, 1895. How many of you knew that his first job was a farmer at the age of 8? I didn't. Jack Dempsey, the Big Six, started boxing in 1914. His older brother Bernie taught him how to fight. In 1919, after all his training, he won a fight against Jess Willard, the world's heavyweight championship. He then became the heavyweight boxing championship from 1919 to 1926. And now to Ava with pop culture.
Prepare yourself today for a story that reminds us of some of the wildest moments from pop culture. Let me tell you the story of Harold Lloyd, which is similar to the story of how many of us lost our jobs in the silent film era. Must I inform to tell you that silent movies were a hit of the 1920s. Remember the days when we could all sit together and enjoy a silent movie? While Harold Lloyd was a shy man, on film he was able to perform amazing events which kept his viewers excited. Although in those days sound was not an option, the people still felt entertained. A joint was made in the beginning of the 1930s which ended Harold Lloyd's career. Now the talkies, sound could be added into the used-to-be silent films. Panic arose from Lloyd and his career was ended. Lloyd's once-to-be life of fame was brought to an abrupt end. Now to Jackson with the news.
Hi, our topic today is about the unforgettable trial of Nikolai Sacco and Bartholomew Vanzetti, the two immigrants that were tried and executed under the court of law. But we all know that the looming question is, was their execution lawful, or was it an anti-immigrant act that was made by the court? The two Italian immigrants were extreme anarchists and were very rebellious to the United States government and had a history of different anarchist activities. Nikolai worked at a shoe factory and Bartholomew worked as a kitchen helper. They were both very poor and they needed money dearly, so they took to a life of crime. Sacco and Vanzetti committed their crime in South Braintree, Massachusetts on April 15, 1920. They first robbed a shoe factory and shortly after murdered the factory plant master and his guard. They were caught at a garage trying to claim an automobile after they executed their plan, and they were arrested on site. And now to our song, I Want to Be Loved by You by Helen Kane.
I wanna be loved by you, just you, nobody else but you. I wanna be loved by you, love. I wanna be kissed by you.
Welcome to the 404 Radio. Today we have Thea, Sophia, Elsie, and me here to give you the recap of the decade we love, the Roaring '20s. First, to tell you about the pop culture of the '20s, here's Elsie.
Thank you, Eli. What an exciting decade. Women get a lot more freedom, as I'm sure you all remember. But do you remember all the hip-to-jive details? Women started pulling away from the typical housewife, and the flapper style went huge. The flapper was typically a short haircut, women wearing shorter skirts, and all you dolls started to enjoy more freedom and fun in the speakeasies. Even more important than these new trends in fashion was that we finally got the right to vote. Women were able to vote because of the 19th Amendment passed in 1920. Our voices can finally be heard. It's about time. How will you use your voice in the 1930s? And now to Eli with sports.
Thank you, Elsie. Hello, everyone. I'm Eli here with the bee's knees of tennis in the 20s. Of course, we all remember Bill Tilden and Helen Wills. Helen won 8 Wimbledon titles, aka the championships. That's a world record. Bill Tilden will go down as one of the best players to ever play. Big Ben, as his nickname, was the first American to win a Wimbledon title, as he would win up to 7 in his nifty career. Amazingly, we had a 6-year streak of winning the Davis Cup until in 1928 we would lose to France and they would dominate for the rest of the decade. That's been the decade of tennis with me. Now moving on to Thea with a word from Hoover.
Thanks, Eli. This will turn any Hooverville into the swankiest house in the town with its stainless steel frame, along with a rotating brush and suctioning action. You might be thinking, now why would I spend 30 clams when my broom and dustpan work just fine? I'll tell you why. The Hoover Vacuum's rotating brush will stir up every last bit of dirt and leave your house sparkling clean, with every hi-hat wondering how you did it. Any wife who wants to keep her house happy needs a Hoover Vacuum. And now to Sophia.
Thank you, Theo. I'm Sophia Gianforti, and today in Studio 404, we're going to be remembering the Scopes monkey trial. You guys all remember Mr. John T. Scopes, the man who was teaching evolution to his high school students. Scopes' goals teach his high school students evolution, violating the Butler Act, which stated you could only teach Genesis in terms of creation. Genesis is a chapter in the Bible. That trial only went 8 days, but those 8 days were filled with chaos all around town. Endless disagreements between people who thought that creation or evolution was the cause of how the earth and its beings were made. If it wasn't for Mr. Bryan allowing Mr. Darrow to put him on the stand, the trial could have ended so much sooner. Turns out the whole trial was just a bunch of hooey. Scopes' violation of the Butler's Act wasn't that big a deal, and he was fined easily $100. Well, that's it for today. Tune in next time for more news from Studio 404.
I've been away from you a long time.
Hello, this is Harry with a story on pop culture. Jazz music boomed in the 1920s and is predicted to keep popularity through the 1930s. As many of you fellas and dolls know, Louis Armstrong and Duke Ellington and the great jazz musicians got to tour the world. They left an imprint with their music wherever they went, not spreading jazz not just through America, but through the whole world. Jazz was popping up everywhere during this decade, even in the streets. Jazz street performers played, lighting up the streets. Lots of young men played jazz for tips, hoping to become the next great jazz musician. Now here is Emma with a word from our sponsors.
Hey dolls, are you tired of putting in all that hard work to clean your kids' dirty clothes? Well, there's a new product for you that's the bee's knees. With our new nifty washing machine from Maytag, you'll be able to wash your clothes in half the time and they will be cleaner faster. You'll have more time for crosswords and dance marathons. This machine from Maytag will rub your clothes between two textured surfaces to deep clean your clothes instead of having to use a washboard. Just put the clothes in, add some water, flip the switch, and you're done. Women living in this time always have to stay back and do all the chores instead of being able to have fun and do what they want. With this new machine, women will be able to have fun, go to dance marathons, and spend less time washing clothes. This will make your life so much easier and you will spend less time with chores. Thanks, and now to Sophia with the newest update on sports.
Remember when the Yankees bought Babe Ruth's contract from the Red Sox at the start of the decade? Well, on May 1st, 9 years ago, Ruth hit a copacetic home run. Before the end of that month, he made 10 more, and by the end of the season, he had a total of 54 home runs. That's about 5 times the number needed for the leading record. Within a couple of years, Ruth hit more home runs than an entire team ever recorded by himself. His main strength was baseball, but his colorful personality also took him far.
Some people are saying that something big is coming Ruth's way and payments could increase for her. Will Ruth really get a chance at being paid higher than the president? Now here's Lila with an update on the news.
Thank you, Sophia. Lila here, and I'm going to bring back the great memories of the bee's knees innovations in aviation. You may remember the famous pilot, Charles Lindbergh. He was the first pilot to carry out with a successful transatlantic flight in a reasonable amount of time. Lindbergh frequently put his savings money towards flying lessons and buying a plane. When it was finally time, in 1923, Lindbergh bought his own plane for $500. The plane was very rickety and was an old model, but it was still worth every penny. Later, Lindbergh became a chief pilot for the first mail route from Chicago to St. Louis. Lindbergh continued to work as a pilot on an airmail plane for a long time. In 1927, Lindbergh decided to give a deal made by a hotelier a chance. The deal was if someone completes a transatlantic flight, they would get $25,000. That was when Lindbergh made the famous flight from New York to Paris. By achieving all of this, Lindbergh convinced the American public that they were ready for commercial air travel. That's it for now. Thanks for tuning in, and sit back and relax as we play The Charleston by Arthur Gibbs and his gang.
Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us today at Studio 404 on a recap of the decade, the Roaring Twenties. Hi, I'm Jack Pfeffer reporting on the influence of cars in our society. Do you remember just a decade ago when only a few Americans could afford cars? Now nifty Model Ts can be spotted all over the streets. The emergence of affordable automobiles have caused major changes in our society. With the use of mass production and an assembly line to lower costs, Henry Ford has created one of the first automobiles without the bargain of heavy sugar. As interest in cars continues to increase, will Americans become even more mobile in the 30s? In this decade, we saw more and more people driving, and experts expect roads will need to be rebuilt. In the near future, we may see refueling stations and motels popping up along the roads. To reflect the sudden interest, American manufacturers have made over 3.2 million cars. Additionally, cars have become a status symbol for many Americans. As society has adapted to cars, I expect it to continue to adapt in the coming decade. And now a word from our sponsor.
Thanks, Jack. Speaking of automobiles, we all know that this new type of transportation is expensive, and not every family has a car. Well, ladies and gentlemen, the all-new Ford Model T will suit your needs. Do you want to be seen a jalopy, which will make you look old, or the new Tin Lizzie, that's the bee's knees? Parents driving the shining Model T with children watch a Yankees and Red Sox game with All-Pro Babe Ruth, or watch Metropolis in theaters. The Ford Model T has comfortable seating and can take you from one place to another in a shorter amount of time. Thanks to the Ford assembly line, the Model T is now affordable and is only for $260 in the color black. So, buy your Ford Model T today and be the swankiest fella in your neighborhood. And now to Lily with her story about horse racing.
The past 10 years have been very eventful for sports, but one of the most memorable athletes we have cheered on wasn't a human, but a horse named Man O' War. The beloved Man O' War, or Big Red, was sold as a yearling for $5,000 in Kentucky to Samuel Riddle. He only raced for 2 years, but in his short career, he won all but one of his 21 races. His tremendous strides made history carrying him to all of his wins, but his one defeat was to the horse with a very fitting name, Upset. Man O' War finished his racing career with 5 world records and a winning record of over $249,000, and I wouldn't be surprised if he wins Horse of the Century.
Just last week, Chicago saw its bloodiest case of gang violence in history. 9 American citizens were murdered, and detectives haven't yet succeeded in uncovering the identities of the killers. Thursday, February 14th, 1929, alleged members of the South Side, a bootlegging gang under the direction of the notorious Al Capone, laid waste to 7 of its rival gang's members, taking out 2 innocent bystanders in the assault. Bootlegging liquor has been a threat to America's safety and prosperity ever since Congress passed the Volstead Act, declaring the production and sale of alcoholic beverage illegal. Chicago's 2 main gangs, the North Side, led by George Bugs Moran, and the South Side, led by Al Capone, have been at war to dominate the booze black market for years. But never before has the violence reached this degree. How was it orchestrated? Well, we believe it was another one of Al's Scarface Capone's ingenious schemes. At approximately 10:30 a.m., the South Siders, dressed as policemen, entered one of the North Side's warehouses. Eyewitnesses claim that the North Siders were ordered by the gun-wielding phony coppers to line up against a wall and were picked off without a scuffle. 2 innocent bystanders were shot and killed as well. Detectives are still struggling to identify the killers. That's all we have now. We'll be sure to report the latest developments. Until then, here's a message from one of our sponsors, Lauren, about the new electric washing machine.
Our time is valuable. Whether you're going to play mahjong with the girls and win some boot or dance the Charleston, why waste time washing the kids' jumpsuits in your flappers? That's applesauce. As you know, the electric washer, The Gyrator, by Erin Montgomery Ward, saves time for women, and your clothes are clean and ready to be worn in no time. Machines can be purchased at Montgomery Ward's. With the new innovation of mass production, washing machines' costs will better your budget and save you money. With easy buy now, pay later installments, you'll save $21.50. Pay with $5 down and $6 monthly. Women are thankful to be off their feet sooner after a day on their Oxford heels doing the chores with this purchase. Fixing the house would be consuming less time with an affordable electric washer. See you at the hardware store. Until then, I'll wash you clean of me to Leva with her spin on the daily sports.
Thank you, Lauren. Sounds like some good berries, folks. Now allow me to tell you about the major concepts of sports. That's right, you heard me correctly, sports. As you all know, sports were very popular throughout the 1920s. People would even attend just college games. Many of us understand how uncomfortable it was due to the population growth in the U.S., also called urbanization, and sports was a way for us to feel at ease and not worry about our troubles in life. Some of you might remember the athletes who turned into celebrities because of their talent in sports. The most acknowledged sports of the 1920s were football and baseball. Babe Ruth was a pretty big cheese, having a great talent in playing baseball. But now I want to tell you about some famous fellas from Notre Dame, the Four Horsemen. It was an exciting game in 1924 when they famously beat the Black Knights and helped lead Notre Dame into their first national championship. Who would ever forget the major event when quarterback Harry Strudenher, left halfback Jim Crowley, right halfback Don Miller, and fullback Elmer Layden had violently and unexpectedly rummaged through the Irish opponents' defenses since Coach Knute Rockne devised the lineup in 1922 during their sophomore season. And now to Adam with some pop culture news.
Howdy, this is Adam with a bit of pop culture from the Roaring Twenties. Over the past decade, we've seen some very copacetic and ducky dance marathons, as well as flagpole sitting and the games of mahjong and crossword puzzles for the older generations. All of you young fellows probably remember the dance marathons that floor flushers couldn't get enough of. If you ask me, it's almost inevitable not to have been in at least one. Just don't take any wooden nickels while competing. Can you recall when there was that dance marathon that lasted 428 hours, almost 3 weeks? Although it was a long one, it was worth it for the $5,000 first place prize. Having such a lasting effect, I wonder if this type of competition will continue into the 30s. Flagpole sitting might have been the wackiest game of the 20s. I always view in amazement of the people who can sit on those small discs with stirrups at the top of the pole. While attempting this great feat, they took 5-minute naps every hour. Some lasted weeks, and were probably in great pain afterwards. I also wonder how long this fad will continue. Now we're gonna take a break. Here's Whispering by Paul Whiteman.
Thanks so much for tuning in today to Studio 404 with our recap of the biggest events of the decade. We're wishing you all the best for the next decade, the 1930s.